All right, so we have a file to download today. It is the product form start file. Let's go ahead and get that file downloaded and opened. And this is data that we've seen before. Just information about products that are available at some sporting goods store. So our goal today is to get introduced to a new kind of thing that we've never worked with before. This is totally different than anything we've done in VBA so far. Every time we've written code to date, we have said insert module. Now we're going to say insert user form. So go ahead and say insert user form and bring in a user form, or what we typically call just more generally a form. Like there's 4 or 5 different kinds of forms, user form and something else. No, just forms is really all that there is. So the idea here is that it allows us to take kind of graphical control of the screen. So instead of just our main interface with the user being the Excel worksheet, maybe with a couple of pop-up input boxes or message boxes once in a while, we can create kind of brand new interfaces. So for example, one might be to say, we've got these dialog boxes, yes, no, bring in some data, but I want something more complex. I want them to add 3 things. Not just one, bring them in one at a time. I want them to be able to add 3 things. Well, you could make your own dialog box that would say, yeah, we want those 3 things. Maybe it says customer number, maybe it says discount rate, and maybe it says due date or something. And you got to pick those things. Maybe you want them to be able to put in the date, but you want to pick from a calendar. So don't type in the date, but drop down a little list, and here's a calendar that you could select the date, and it will just do the date. And so that's what user forms allow us to do. So when we add a user form, it gives us the blank form. Now, a user form is an object, just like any other object. So what do we know about user forms? What can you tell me about user forms? They must have properties and, yeah, they have properties and methods. So we can work with user forms, they're objects. The thing that's just different about them is that there's this visual aspect that we really haven't dealt with so far, at least not having a canvas that we can kind of play with and work on. So let's go ahead and look at some of the properties of the form itself. Now, if your properties window isn't showing, let's just make sure it's showing. So I'm going to choose View and then the Properties window, which is F4. And that brings me up the list of properties for whatever I have selected on the form. Now, right now, there's nothing on the form besides the form. And so we can put other stuff on it, but not yet. So this should show us that we're on user form 1. And I am going to change the name of this form. So instead of user form 1, which is the default name, I'm going to call it FRM, a little prefix that I use anytime I'm naming a form, and I'm going to call it product, form product. And the idea here is I want to be able to create a way for the user to edit all the information about one product. Now listen, if I'm looking at the data over here in Excel, and the user saying, what, I got to update a bunch of information about this product, what's really wrong with this particular interface for updating information about one product? There are some things that are really wrong about it. Can you tell me what they might be? Maybe you can come up with 3 or 4. Maybe instead of saying what's wrong, saying what could be a better way to edit one product than what we have just presented to us right here on the screen? Yep.
This format, you have to find the row that it's on, and you want to make sure that you don't break anything that might be critical to other processes that might be running. So, so one of the problems is, one, your users have too much freedom to be able to do that.
Okay, so maybe this cell lets you put in just about anything. We can do some work there with what's it called? Data validation. But still, yeah, there's issues. A little too got a lot more flexibility here than maybe we want to have just for a user. From Edna, in the accounting department. Not that I'm trying to cast aspersions on accounting as a profession, just on Edna. She may not be. We might want to pad the walls a little bit. Okay, go ahead. Oh, so actually being able to find a particular product might like some way to be able to search for a product. Yeah. And of course we can, search by name, but it might be nice to be able to have, some kind of more advanced search feature that's specifically customized to this, not just searching for text that's built into Excel, but something a little more specific. Yeah, I like it. What else? there's one that's really big to me, and that is when I'm editing a product, all I care about is this row. And everything else besides that row is noise. And this row doesn't even fit on the screen. I got to scroll left to right to get to the data. I got so much space on the screen, but I've narrowed it down to this little tiny bit. And so that's one of the great things about a form is that you can make it big, as big as the whole screen, and then you've got room to be able to organize things in a way that makes sense. Okay, so we could probably think of some other things that that we could try to improve by making a user form. Go ahead. Question is, I'm not sure if the mic is on. That's really good. I think it is. Maybe I can adjust the volume up a little bit. You're worried about the video. Can you hear me through the mic now? Anyone hear me through the speaker? It says I'm on the wireless one. So let's just hope that it's recording okay. Thank you, though. All right. So let's go back to the user form. So I'm going to call this form product. Now, I am going to have to refer to this form by its name through code. And so I might end up with 3 or 4 different user forms in a project, and I don't want to just have them called user form 1, user form 2. I'd like something a little more descriptive in the name. So I've called it form product here. Now, another property here is the caption. So the caption is what shows up here in the title bar. So I'll change that to say product information. Oh, is there anything else to change about the form itself? No, probably not. But we've just changed some properties about the form. Now, the main thing that we do with forms is we put on other objects. We put on other visual objects that we can use to interact with the user. Now, those are called tools. Actually, they're called controls, but they're in a thing called a toolbox. And if yours isn't showing like mine isn't, let me zoom in on this. If you look right up here, there's a tool that looks vaguely communist. It's got a hammer crossed with a wrench. I'm always a little nervous to click on it, but that should just bring up your tools. Control minus. Did it bring up my tools? There they are. If it's grayed out, that's a good question. I'm not sure what would be causing it to be grayed out. Let me come take a look real quick. I had to click on the form. Click on the form and then try it again. Is that it? Okay, so here are the controls. Controls are just visual objects that we put on forms. And you might say, wow, there's quite a few controls here. We probably won't deal with any of the ones that aren't showing here in class. Let me just show you there are more. And the ones that are more are these are the ones that come built into Excel, but your computer probably has lots of others on them. And where they all come from, I'm not sure. But if you right click, not on one of these buttons, but if you right click, you can choose additional controls, and then you will get a list of other things that you could bring on to work with this form. Wow, the Microsoft RDP client control. RDP stands for remote data protocol, I think. It basically lets you control another computer from here. So you could drop that control in, and this form could connect on to some other computer, and you could control it through this form in VBA. So you've got lots of really interesting things. I don't know what else is here. The tree view control, the Microsoft web browser. That one's not on by default. It used to be. So you could actually bring in a web browser and just drop it on this form, and your form now can browse the web. It will actually be using Internet Explorer, so it might not be the best experience, but that's what that one is. I don't know what else is here. VSTO. Seems like sometimes there's some stuff from Adobe. Yeah, the Adobe DC browser. I don't know. I've never done the reader. You might just be able to drop on a PDF reader and read a document, present that right here on the phone. Okay, we're not going to put these additional controls, and realize that anytime you put an additional control on, it will work if that control happens to be on the computer that it's going to. So if it's only for your own computer, you're okay, but if you're thinking, I got to move this to give this to someone else, those controls may or may not be there, and that can add a little bit of headache. Okay, but let's go ahead and let's put a couple of these on here. So let me start with this first one. This first one, by the way, the little arrow is not a control at all. It is how you unselect any control. That's just going back to your pointer. So this first one here is the label. And the way you put controls on is you click the control, and then you come to your form and you click and drag to say where you want it to go. So here's, and it's made this label, called it label 1. That is a delightful name. Anytime I'm going to refer to that object through code, and my intention here is to put the product number right here. In fact, I could like put a label that says product number and then show the number, but I think people would probably catch on pretty quickly, even without the label, that that's the product number, especially if I format it in a way that makes sense. Labels are static text. You can change the text, but the user can't change it. So programmatically, we can put whatever text we want to in here, but the user, try as they might to change that text, they won't be able to do it. So here's what I'd like to do. I am going to be referring to this through code, so I'm going to give it a name. And there's just kind of conventions for how you name these things. Here's the problem. I might need two or three different kinds of controls that all deal with the product ID. So I can't just call it product ID because I might have a label called product ID and a text box where someone can type in called product ID. And I don't know what else I might have called product ID. But, and for that reason, we kind of generally say, you know what, it's helpful to prefix the name that you're giving this object with just a little abbreviation for what kind of object it is. And so this is a label, so I'll call it LBL as the prefix, and then I'll call it prod ID. So that is the name that I will be referring to this through my code in. And you might think, as I did when I was first starting off, you know what, whatever the name is, that's great, I'll just use it. But your code gets pretty difficult to work with pretty quickly if you've got abstract names for all the controls that you're working with. All right, I would like to cue to the user that this is non-editable text, and yet that it is actually data from the record. So how would I do that? You know, what are kind of conventions for the way that we expect to see data that's like that? What should we do? Okay, so maybe we should have a gray background. Right now it does have a gray background. It's the same gray background as the rest of the form. So maybe a little darker gray. So I'll just come here and choose the back color. I'll drop that down and it should give you something to choose from. And I have a couple of choices. You can say, listen, there are settings on your operating system about, you know, what color to make buttons, what color to make the active border. You can pick, you know, kind of those presets, or as I recommend, just come to the palette and pick the color of gray that you're interested in. So that was like the third one down or something, back color, third gray over there on the left. And these are just a few colors to get you going. You can actually plug in the color number here. It's not in a very nice format, but that's a color number. We could play with it by changing some of these letters. It's a hex number. So, or maybe not. Anyway, more that you can do. Now, I would probably like to also put a border around it because we typically, when we have data that's kind of come from somewhere else that's displayed here, we have a little border. So I'll put a border around it. The border color is already okay. It looks like it's a dark gray color. That should be fine. But the style, back style is opaque. That's fine. Border style is set to none. So let me set the border style to 1, which probably just means to show it. That looks pretty good. And I think I'd probably also like to center that data. So down here, there's some text align. I'll change that to center. And maybe we'll just make it not quite so big. I don't think my IDs are all that big. So now I've got this thing called O. And by the way, I don't want it to say label 1. And that should be, I have to make sure that I have that tool selected. That should be my caption. I could change that if I want, but when this form opens, I am going to just put some new data in there. In fact, even before the user sees it, we're going to put some new data in there. So I'm just going to leave it as label 1. That doesn't bother me at all. Questions? How are we doing so far, folks? All right, let's also add in a place for the product name. We might want to update the product name. So I don't want them updating the product label or the product ID, but I do want them to update the product name if they want to. So that's the next control over here. It's called the text box. So I'll click to select it, and then I'll click and drag to bring it in. And maybe the name, I'll give a little more space to. And this one, I'm going to give a name. It's a text box, so I'll call it txt name. And, whoops, what happened? All right, so now, you know, this was made in the 1990s, so we kind of stick with the conventions from them, which is to have this 3D looking shape, which I don't really care for. So that's just a property. I think it's called 3D shading, but where exactly it is, I'm not sure. Special effect, maybe? Special effect sunken. I don't want sunken or raised. Flat. Ooh, there's etched. I've never tried etched, but I'm going to stick with flat. Let's just make it flat. Then I probably do also want a border around it. So border color is good. Border style, I'll set that back to 1. And so that's kind of the look that I'll be happy with here. So not a whole lot to do on this one. Could have left it as that sunken look, but I changed its name, made it look about the way that I wanted it to look. And I think we're looking pretty good. I think at this point, we're ready to put some data into it. You say, you know what, let's write some VBA that'll put some data into this. Now, in order, I think I want to introduce one more concept before we bring the data in here. And to do that, I want to bring this button on. So we have different kinds of buttons. We've got option buttons, which are, you know, like radio buttons. You select one, it unselects the others that are there. And we have command buttons. There's also a thing called a toggle button. Where's the toggle button? The toggle button icon looks different than it ever did before. I wonder if they changed it. Let me just see. No, it's the same. It's hideous. It's a button that looks like it'll do something, but all it does is turn itself on or off. You push it, it'll stick down. Push again, it comes up. I think in the 1990s, I thought that was neat, but I think that's a really bad idea. So the different kind of buttons, and so this is not just a button, it's called the command button. You're going to run a command. So I'm going to select that, and maybe I'll put it down here, kind of bottom right-hand corner. This will just be the OK button. So let's go ahead and get this configured for OK. Because this is a command button, I'll give it a name, CMD OK. Let's see, what other properties do we want to set about this? I'll set the caption just to be OK. And let me set the default property to be true. The default property says this is the default button. You can only have one default button on your form. The default button says, you know what? I mean, normally we're going to write code that says when the user clicks on this button, do something. But if it's the default button, there's another way to get at that code that the user gets to when they clicks, and that is by just pressing enter. You press enter, and it'll be just like clicking on this button. Okay. So let's just go ahead and see what it takes to make this button do something. I'm going to get to the code that's behind this button. Now, you may remember, I don't expect you to remember, at the beginning of the semester, I told you the only place we ever put code that gets saved is in a module. And that's true. We're about to write code, and it's going to go into a special module that's a part of this form. So when we add the user form, it actually brings a module in as well. The way I get to that module, or the way I get to that code, is by double-clicking anything on this form. Let me go ahead and double-click the OK button. And it's going to bring up the module, and it's going to actually guess at what I might want to do here. So it says we're going to make a sub-procedure. Ooh, this is a private. We haven't talked about the keyword private. Private just means this sub-procedure cannot be accessed from outside of the module. So if I've got, you know, something else, you know, some other module running somewhere, I can't come up to this form and do something with it. Won't have access to it. But it's a sub-procedure, just like a sub-procedure. And this name now is really important because the name says, listen, and this is the part that's really a new concept for us. So far, every time we've wanted to run code, we've got a sub-procedure, and we have to do something that explicitly says, go run that sub-procedure. Either press a hotkey that's attached to it, choose it off the list of macros, make a button, you know, on the form that when you click it, it goes and runs that sub-procedure. And so this sub-procedure will run automatically when this object and it is defined right here in the name. It's not like there's some list somewhere else. It's this name. If I change the name of this, it will quit working. So the name is important. So I've got the name of an object, an underscore, and then the name of an event. Now, events are a new idea. So some objects have events. Not all objects have events, but some objects have events. Events are activities that the object can respond to. So when something happens, this object can go, oh, my event just happened. I got to do whatever I do when someone clicks on me. And there are lots of different events. You might have guessed about the event for the command button, that there'd be a click event. But let me just show, we have two drop-down boxes here. So let's just take a look at the first one. These drop-down boxes have been there all the time on all of our models we've looked at. They're not really interesting until we get to a form. There's some other times when they are, but we haven't been there yet. This first one just says all the objects that are available on this form. So I'm going to drop that one down. We should recognize some of these. There's CMD OK, LBL product ID, and TXT name. And then there's another one, just the user form itself. Now, it doesn't bring the name in because it figures there's only one user form here. And if you put the name, it might be harder to find. But so the user form is always called user form. So when we're going to write code that responds to an event, we have to identify a particular object, which we did when we clicked. But now, let's come over here, and I'm going to leave selected CMD OK. So we're working on that command button. I'm going to come over here to my list of events. And these are all the events that can respond to. So there's click. We have double click. When the user double clicks that button, we can do something different. When the user enters, how do you enter a button? It's like if you tab to it, when that button gets the focus, when it loses the focus. I'm not sure how you get to the error. So we have key press. So if that button has the focus and the user presses a key, we can respond differently from when they push the key down from when they let the key up. So all these things are different events that we can respond to. Now, like if the mouse button goes down on that, we can trigger some code. If the mouse button goes up, we can trigger some code. If the mouse moves, even 1 pixel in the boundary of the button, we can make code execute. Let's just go ahead and do that one. That one's kind of fun to play with. So I'm going to choose mouse move. And the VBA editor will say, oh, you chose object and event. I'm going to give you the sub-procedure for that. Because we don't want you to have to type this, because if you get it wrong, it won't work. So it generates it for you. Great. And so it says, when this object, CMD OK, receives the mouse move event, execute this code. So let me just do this. Let me put here, actually, I'm going to, this is code we'll end up throwing away, but let me just do this. Let me say txt name dot text. So here's the object that I'm going to manipulate. Here's the property I'm going to manipulate. I'm just going to set that equal to the time from the system, current time from the system clock, now. So when I click on that button, it will put now there. Let's just go ahead and run this so we can see how it works. When I have the user form code showing, or the user form itself, I can click the little play button or press F5, and it should bring that up. So now if I click on OK, it puts that time there. I click on it again, it'll put the new time there. Okay, so that's code that's executing in response to, and the language I want you to think about this is when an object receives an event. So when this object receives the click event, go and do whatever we told it to do. So we could do something, let me just go ahead and take that code and cut it out from here. Whoops, I got to close my form. Double click back on my button. I'm going to cut it from here and put it down here. So now, same code's going to execute, but it's just a different, it's a different event that's triggering that code. So I'll run this, F5. And now I'm not clicking, but as soon as the mouse moves, it will put the current time up there. Now we only get increments of seconds, and so even though it's, I'm probably able to make that move dozens of times in a second, it actually is updating it every time, but I just don't see the change because it's putting the same information that's there. Okay, so that's the point. We'll do one more example here to help drive that home. But first, let's change that code. Let's get rid of this one that's dealing with the text, and let's actually put something useful on that button. We're going to close the form. So back to the button. I'll delete this text from the mouse move, and back on the click, let me put, I'll do this, unload me. Me is like an alias for the current form. What's the name of the form? It's called FRM product. I can say unload FRM product. And when I unload an object, it says, oh, this object is loaded into memory. Unload says, get it out of memory. If it's out of memory, it's dead and gone. And so this will cause the form to go away. Because there's only one form this could possibly be, there's a synonym called me. And the reason it's a good idea to use that synonym is that if you decide to change the name of the form, any code you have that's referring to the form itself will stop working because it's relying on the name of the object. But now, since it's an alias, it doesn't matter what you call the form. Me still refers to the form that the code is written on. All right. I'm going to write a joke in VBA, and let's see if you get it. You'll get it when you see it, but look at the code. This is code you haven't seen before, but see if you can figure it out. So when the mouse moves on this, I am going to say CMD OK. What is this? That is an object dot some property. I'm going to set that to some new value. What am I going to set it to? I'm going to set it, well, let's refer to the width of the whole form, me dot the inside width. There's an inside width and a width. Width is the outside border. There's some border on the form. Width is how wide it is on the outside. Inside width is how wide it is on the inside. Times a random number between 0 and 1. What does this do? Say it again. It's going to move the button. Now, that is not behavior you expect from a button. Usually, the button sticks there, you put the mouse to it, and then you click it. What does this one do? Let's take a look. As soon as the mouse moves over that, it's going to move it to a new location. Now, is it possible for me to click on this? It is possible. I have to move very slowly because it's going to move to a random position, and it could move right under the mouse. And if it does, I could click, as long as I don't move another pixel. Oh, it was there. Did you see it? I had it. That was my chance. Now, because I made this the default button, I can still invoke the click by hitting enter. And so I'll hit enter, and then it closes it out. Let's just do two more things because it's fun. Let me say I'm going to set the top. Moving left to right is fun, but not enough. To the inside height. Oh, I have one little problem here. I'm going to go ahead and run this again, and we'll see if we see the problem. The problem is that I'm moving the left to any part of the form. And so I can actually push this button so that it's not even showing on the form. I don't quite want to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce this, the left, by the width of the button. So instead of the whole inside width, let me take the inside width minus, and how do I say however wide the button is? It's just a property of the button. So CMD, OK, dot width. So I'll do the same thing for the height. Now I'm going to move it to a different place vertically. CMD height minus CMD OK, or inside height, CMD OK dot height. And let's do one more thing. CMD OK dot width equals what it used to be minus 2. What is that going to do? It's going to, every time it moves, it's going to get smaller by 2 little ticks. This is going to drive Edna crazy. You know, at first she'll be upset because she can't get to the button, and then right about now she's going to go, is that button it's getting smaller. My chance of getting to it is smaller by each time. Oh no. What am I going to do? Oh no. Huh? Any way to click on the button? No way to click on the button. I can enter it. I can trigger that code to the different route because we set the default. So press enter should still go ahead and get us out. Okay, so that's kind of a fun example. You know, you could put something on this. Oh, let's do this. I don't know. Maybe I'm taking this too far, but let's just say if the month of now is equal to 4 and the day of now is equal to 1, then we do this. What did I just do? Yeah, it'll only behave that way on April 1st. No matter the year, but you know, every time we move the mouse. Now, interestingly, every time we move the mouse over that button, it's going to trigger this code. And this code, I mean, even 1 pixel, this code's going to go, is it April 1st? No. Is it April 1st? No. Is it April 1st? No. And, you know, but how long does it take to say, is it April 1st? No. How long does that take? Yeah, oh yeah. Less than a second is too long. I mean, if we're saying, somewhere less than a second, that's too long. That would kind of really slow things down. But it takes, you know, millisecond or less. It's a tiny amount of time to do that. So now if I run this, that button should behave just like normal until the witching hour. And then it'll behave that way just for that day, and then it'll go back to normal. Okay, and the whole point of this example is to get us into the mindset that the way, in user forms, the way that we make code run is by saying, I got to think about the combination of object and event. When a certain object receives a certain event, then I can make code execute. So, given that, how shall I, you know, where shall I put the code that is going to actually put the data onto my form? I mean, so far, it looks pretty bad. It says label 1 and nothing. I want this to come up with an actual ID and then the name of that product. So let's think about where should that code go. You've got to think in terms of object and event. So let me come to my code module. So let's start right here. Which object? I'll give you a hint. One of the objects we already have there is a good choice. So which object do you think we should say, when this object receives a particular event, we don't know what the event is yet, but when this object receives an event, put some data onto the form. There's only 4 to choose from there. Which one do you like? Be bold. You know, unlike the exam last week, you can answer this wrong with no effect on your grade. Someone, you know, I'm going to sit here until someone says at least something. Label. No, not that one. Thank you. So this is going to be the user form itself. So we're going to say when something happens to this user form, we want to run the code to put the data on. So I'm going to select user form, and it's going to guess. It said maybe when the user form gets clicked, when the user form receives the click event, is that the event we want? You want that form to open up and then you have to click somewhere on the form to make the data show up? I don't like it. It had to guess something. It didn't guess very well. I'm going to get rid of it. Now, but now that the, oops, I guess I'm going to leave it there. Now that the user form is selected, come over here and look at all of the events that pertain to the user form. By the way, when you look at the list of events, it's only the events that pertain to the object that you have selected in the drop down to the left. So take a look, scan this, and pick. Pretend I'm not here to help. I think Google is asking. Google's going to try to help. Thank you, Google.
Here's a result from search.
What do you think? There's a lot to choose from. Yeah, it's not Zoom. I'm not even sure what Zoom does here. Take a guess. Activate would do the trick, but let me tell you something. Let me give you a little kind of background on where this form can be. This form can be in 3 different places, kind of 3 different states. Number 1, it can be just a part of the workbook, but not active at all. Not in memory, not showing, just it's saved in the workbook, but we're not even using it right now. The next place it can be is it can be loaded into memory, but not visible. So it's possible to say, you know, we got this form loaded into memory, but we just can't see it right now. And then it can go into the state where it's all 3. It's part of the workbook, it's loaded in memory, and it's being shown. So activate happens after the form has been shown. So if I said, you know, show this form, it would activate, and then it would go, oh, we would open it, and it would say, oh, I just got activated, put the data in. Now, it's possible, we're not going to see it in this class, but it's possible to have 2 forms open that can kind of live side by side. We're going to use this like a dialog box. Once it comes up, you know, it's kind of be the one that takes control. And we could open another one from there, so we could have, you know, 2 on top of each other. And so when we actually select one form versus the other, each time we select it, it gets activated. And so if I had 2 different forms open, every time I came to this one, it would activate. So activate would work. It would look like it's doing a pretty good job, but it's not the right one for this. Yeah. Yeah, initialize is the other one. So activate is when it goes from being loaded into memory to being shown on the screen. Initialize is when it comes from the workbook up into memory. And that's before it gets shown. So anything that we do on the initialize event happens when the form first opens, and it does before the user sees it. That's where we want to put it, because we want to get this thing configured before the user looks at it. So let's go ahead and come down here and choose initialize. And now that we're working in code, I think I'm going to zoom back out. Okay, so now what we want to do in initialize is we want to actually start getting the data off of the sheet into the form. Let's do this. Since we know a little bit about module level variables, let me go ahead and make a module level variable here, just called row. And we'll do that as a long integer. Okay. And we'll use that to just keep track of which row the user is on. So let's start off by setting a value for row, and then we can use that in different procedures here. So we're going to come here and we're going to say row equals, which row should we choose? We've got to pick one row of data. Which one should we choose? There's hundreds to choose from that actually have data. What do you like? Pick one. Tell me how to pick the row. If you were using this, how would you want to pick the row? Yeah, maybe just go to that. You know, I'm working along here. I'm on this row, and now I want to show this form. I just want to show the data that's on the active row. So there's a method called active cell, and it returns a range. And so from there, I can say I want the active cells row. I can ask what row the active cell is on. What's my active cell on right now? 21, right? So immediate window, active cell, dot row, tells me 21. So now say whatever row is active, that's great. Just assign that here into the variable. Now that'll make my code a little easier to read, because now I can just refer to row anytime I'm going after the data. Now let's see, let me show what's my property? I want my Project Explorer. View the Project Explorer. So yeah, look, I've given a name to this sheet. So it shows products on the label, but its code name is data. So I can refer to this directly with the word data. So here's what I want to do. I want to put that ID in there. So the name of the object is LBL. LBL ID, the name of the object, LBL ID dot, maybe it's called product ID. Here's a little trick. If you say me, that refers to this form, dot, it gives you all the things you can choose from, including your objects. I know it's a label, LBL, there it is, product ID. You don't have to have the me. If you don't have the me, it assumes you're talking about this form, but that can help while you're looking stuff up. Product ID, now I'm gonna change some property. Which property should I do to put the, here's kind of my properties to choose from. Which one should I do? Well, label, it turns out label has a caption, just like a form, a caption that kind of says, what does it say? So the caption is going to be equal to my worksheet called data, dot cells, row number row, column number 1. And I want the value of that object. I'll have something similar. Oops, I guess I'll start it from scratch. me.txt name.text. There's no caption for a text box. It actually is called text or value, incidentally. Value works as well. I just need to know the row that data are in. I don't know what the name is. Name looks like it's in F. This looks like the name. Yeah, that's F. And so since I'm using cells, I can just refer to it as column F if I put it in quotes. Okay, so now when this form gets initialized, when it's first starting up, before it even shows on the screen, it should put this in, and it's on its way to show. It should come right through and show. So I'll push play, and I'm on cell 1. So that's a problem. So I don't ever want the user to be editing the heading here. So we'll correct that in a minute, but let me choose a different one. Here's the Sandhill Crane. I'll run this. And now we've got the information for the Sandhill Crane, the product number and the name right here. Now, let me change it. Instead of the Sandhill Crane, the Sand Gully Crane, G-U-L-L, Gully? Was there an E? Gully? And you'll notice that it updates the data straight away, didn't it? It didn't touch it. Why not? Yeah, the only thing I said is when this form loads, right? When this form gets initialized, do something. I don't have any code that says put it back out to the worksheet. Now, if you've come from other environments, especially database kind of development environments, usually what you can do is you can just say, look, here's a field, drop it onto the form, and you're done. It shows the data, you change it, it changes the data, but the user form in VBA is more general than that. I don't have any reason to think you're doing database-y kinds of things here, which is kind of what we're doing. So it doesn't kind of give you that extra help. So let's go ahead and write the code to save it. And then we'll look at some of the other controls that can go on here. In fact, let's do this. Because there may be several things that make me want to save the data, to kind of show the data or to save the data, let me go ahead and make 2 different sub-procedures for that. So I'm going to make a sub-procedure here of my own called show data. And then I'll also make one called save data. So I think when I initialize, I still want to set the row here, but then instead of showing the data right here and initialize, because there may be other things that might make me want to show data. I don't intend to do this in this example, but we could put a button on this form that says, go to the next record. And what would the button do? Yeah, well, we would say, let's change row, add 1 to row, and then show the data. And then that would do that. My thought here is to treat it more like a dialog box. You open it up, and you work on that one until you close it. And you want to open another one, go to a different row and open it there. So now I better call show data from my initialize. And I am going to call save data from when the user clicks OK. Save data. So down here, and I really don't have to do very much because the user cannot change the label. I don't have to worry about that one. but they could change this one. So I'm going to take this, and I actually want to do exactly the opposite. When I'm reading it, I want to read the data from the worksheet, put it into the form, put it into the control on the form. When I save the data, I want to take the data from the form, put it on the worksheet. I literally just reverse the order of these two expressions. So column F on the current row, set its value to whatever is in the control on the form. If you've got that written, go ahead and give it a try. You should see now that it'll open up, whichever one you're on, it'll open that up. If you change the data and click OK, it'll save it. I think. I'm pretty confident in my skills. Let's see. Sandhill Crane. Sand Mountain Crane. And, oh, you're kidding me. So when this is mouse move. It would have done it if I moved on it. I had it in the wrong place. Oh. So click before. We got to do it before we unload. What if I put it after we unloaded? What does unload do? It dumps the whole form out of memory. What's going to happen to the save data statement after it's been unloaded? Poof, it's gone. So you got to make sure you have the code in the right order here. All right, let's try that again. Sand Valley Crane. And now we've saved that data out. Okay, questions so far? Go ahead. So we defined it right up here. We made a module level variable called row just because I knew that I wanted to build a sub procedure here called show data that I might call from different places. I wanted to be able to set the row when the user form opens and then be able to refer to it from other places. Other questions? All right, let's look at some of the other controls that we can build with the data. So let's see what else we've got. All right, well, we've got each one of these products is product ID, and then it's in a category. So for a category, how long is our category? I think I've got some lists. We worked with lists here in the same example. I cleaned them up a little bit. We didn't quite get all the way through that example in class. But category is pretty long. So I think I would like to limit the categories. They have to choose one that's here in this category. It's in this list of categories. So we have several options for choosing from a list when we're making a user form. So let's take a look. So the next one let's do is categories. I'll come back to my form. And let's put a category here. So for that one, I'm going to use this thing here called a combo box. Combo box is called the combo box because the combination of a text box, which is here, and the list box, which is the next one. List box and combo box are really similar to each other. Let's just go ahead and do the combo box first. So I'm going to click and bring that in here. And this is going to be my category. So I'm going to call this, oops, a little bit smaller. I'm going to call this, it's a combo box, so I'll call it CBO category. This one probably makes sense for me to actually put a label next to it as well that says category. So I will change the caption of this one to read category. And this comes with like a gray background. I'd prefer there to be no background on that. So I'm going to change the back style to transparent. Even though it's the same color of gray, this way, if I get the urge to change the background color of my form, I won't have a gray background button. It'll just show whatever color is in the back. Okay, now there's a little more setup required for this one. I can still put the value there in the same way I do the text box. Let's go ahead and start with that. So when we show data, I'm just double clicking the form. By the way, there's another way to get it to the module. If you've got your Project Explorer up, these two buttons will toggle back between the code view and the module and the form view of the module. But those buttons were probably there for decades before I ever even noticed them. I always just kind of click, double click, and it will take me into the code view. And then if you double click on the name of the form, it takes you back to the form. Okay. So when we show data, I'm going to show the category. So I've got me.cbo category dot text. And we're going to go ahead and read a value off of this. Instead of row F, column F, the category comes from column B. So name of the cat, or name of the control, name of the property, read it off the worksheet. That should bring that category in now as well. In fact, if I wanted to change it, do the same thing here, just make column B equal to the text of my category. So I've made it so that I can now edit that, but I haven't done anything with the list. So even though I've made it a combo box, there's nothing in the list to choose from. Unless this is set to only allow entries from the list, I think it'll let me edit it. Let's see. Yeah, I got rid of that C. I can put that C back. So we'll want to do a couple of things here. One, we'll want to tell it, hey, don't allow anything that's not on the list, and actually have a list. So that's the next part, to have the list. But I want to make sure that we're kind of ready, because you won't be able to do the list example unless you've gotten this far. So anyone wanting to come along, need some help getting to where we are? Good? So yeah, here's where we're showing the data, and then there's an analogous line below where we're saving the data. And even if you haven't quite gotten that part in, building the list will come along just fine. So let's ask ourselves, where do we want the list to get generated? Think in terms of object and event. We've got to read the list off the worksheet somewhere, sometime. What should we do it? Where should we do it? Go ahead. Possibly anytime we drop it down. That's not where we're going to do it, but let's take a look and see what the option might be for that. So I'm going to choose CBO category. And there's change. That would be too late. Before update, after update, maybe when we enter it. MSGBOX. I'm curious. Let me just pop up a message box when we enter it. Entered. If I click that, yeah, so clicking it before it's dropped down, we could make it happen right there. Now, and in fact, if what shows up in this list is dependent on something else on this form, like maybe there's some kind of functional dependency between category and manufacturer, or category and department. So I've got a department, and those departments have categories. Then it might make sense to say, pick the department, and then pick the category. And when you drop the category down, we're going to check to see, did you only be the right list, for this department. I haven't ever looked at this data closely enough to know if there is a connection between those two. But we could do that. We're not going to do that. We're going to take a simpler approach that just says when the form first gets open, let's put in the list. So let's go ahead and do that. We've got show data. I may make a different procedure. In fact, maybe I'll just put this on initialize. So let's think about it. If I were to say, you know what, give me some button that takes me to the next row and shows me the data again, I don't want to be loading that list again when I went to the next row, probably only the first time when I initialize. So before I show the data, I'm going to go ahead and initialize. In my forms initialize, I'm going to go ahead and fill that in. So now for this, it's going to take a little loop because I've got a loop across the data on my lists sheet. So let me declare R as an integer or as a long integer. And we'll just do a kind of a normal do loop that we've done a dozen or more times so far. So category is in column F. Do until, let's set R equal to 2. So we're going to start reading on row 2 of our lists. Do until our list sheet dot cells, row number R, column number, I went and looked and I forgot. Column number F dot value is blank. R equals R plus 1. Do events. Remember, do events. When I have a do loop, I always like to put it in just in case I've done something that inadvertently puts me into an endless loop. I can get out of it. And so now this will execute for every item in that list of categories. And what I want to do is I want to add that item into the list. Well, fortunately, the combo box has a method for that. So I'm just going to say CBO category dot, and it happens to be the very first one, add item. And so I just give it the value that I want to add, which I already have right here. So I'll just copy that. I just want to add, so instead of, we've done this loop a bunch of times where we print off whatever's in that range. Here, I just want to add that into my list. So when I initialize the form now, it will build that list. And it won't ever need to build that list again until it gets read out of memory again. That's when we're going to check the list. Now, if this was a list that changed while the form is open, I could expect it to change. I might want to think differently about that. But here, I'm expecting this form to open and close from scratch every time the user goes to a different cell to edit. So I don't think I got to worry about that data having changed in the meantime. So now I should be able to run this form. And I should have now something to pick from on the list. I've still got that entered I'll have to take off of. But now that list is there. I could come and choose a different category. Say OK, and that should save it. Did it? It looks like it didn't save it. I was here. What did I miss? What's that? Oh, I put it on the wrong row. Or maybe I was on this row. Let's try again. I'm on row 3. Thank you. Let's run this and change this to fillet. Oh, I don't think it changed. Field care. Did I miss it? Might have something to do with that other dialog box that I had open. Flight jackets. Okay, yeah, so it is working. Let me go ahead and get rid of that. Enter, so we're not going to do anything when we enter the list box. Yeah, that seems to be going okay. Questions on the combo box? Okay, so combo box works well when I have a list that's relatively long, so I don't want to display the whole list, and there are values that change. What do you think? Do I expect to get new categories through time? Yeah, I'll probably make up some new kind of category. We'll start selling something we didn't sell before. We'll need a category for it. Well, in this case, we would only need to be able to add that to our list of categories. I think there's actually code that will generate the list of categories from the data, but you know, at the very least, I'd have to come to categories, add it in here, and the form's ready to use it. Now, there's another way to make a pick from a set, and we're going to use it in a way that's maybe a little bit dangerous, but we're going to actually embed the values that we want to choose from into the form. Now, the problem with that, you know, here, the values are just data. They're getting loaded into the form. I'm going to write these values onto the form for this next one. The big danger here is that if these options change, it's not just changing data. I got to come and reprogram. I got to come and change the code. I got to change the form to do what it's supposed to do. And so this should be for things that only never ever change, or change really rarely. I'm not sure I would be comfortable using, I'm going to use this for department. There's like 4 departments. Adding a department, probably not as often as adding a category, but probably in reality, I probably wouldn't really choose to use that. But with this data, it seems to be kind of my best bet. So, and for that is going to be the radio button. So we use the option button for that. So it turns out I can have multiple sets. Remember what an option button does is when you select an option button, it makes it active and it gets rid of any other selection that you might have had. And if I just put these option buttons onto the form, that would work okay, but I can only have one set. Because it'll say, oh, I'm kind of at the level of the form, and if you select this one, it's going to unselect everyone else. So you couldn't have 2 sets, an option button set over here and an option set over here, unless you bind those together in a frame. So let's start with that. The frame is this tool right here, looks like a little rectangle with some letters on it. And I'm just going to bring that in here. The caption is frame 1, or the name is frame 1. I'm actually not going to be referring to the frame. The sole purpose of this frame is to group these buttons together. So I'll leave that unchanged, but I do want to change the caption. And I'm going to call this department. And I'm not sure why that's stuck on. So I am then, I've got my department, I've only changed the captions, all I've changed. Now I'm going to come and bring in 4 radio buttons, 4 option buttons. So I'll just click and drag to bring those in. In fact, once I've got one, I can kind of copy and paste. And they actually paste right on top of each other. So the first one won't, but then if you just paste again, it will. And I'll just kind of get these organized so that I can see them all. Okay. Whew. Now I'm going to go ahead and configure these. There's only 4. I forget what they are. Like outdoor. Where are they? Hunting, outdoor, general, and apparel. So I'm going to change both the names of these to OPT as the prefix, OPT hunting. And I'll change the caption to say hunting. This is a little bit typing intensive here. Or hutting. I'm not sure what hutting is. Sounds fun though. Oh, I went to correct it and didn't correct it. Next one, I'll just do outdoor. Order doesn't really matter to me here. OPT outdoor. Out. And caption outdoor. Apparel. OPT apparel. Is there 2 P's? Yeah, I think so. APP, I gotta look at it. AREL. And apparel. And then the other one I think is general. Whew. Maybe my box is a little bit wider than it needs to be. And now if I run this, you'll see that these buttons, they work. We haven't done anything with the data yet, but when you select one, it unselects the others. And if I had other buttons out here on the form itself or in another frame, they'd be independent. I could have two buttons selected as long as they're in different sets. But now actually getting the data here is different. We're not just copying the data from the form. We have to look at the data that's or copying the data from the worksheet. We have to look at the data on the worksheet and decide which of these 4 buttons to activate. Whew. So let's go ahead and do it. So back to our show data. And this is a great option for a case. So let me say select case, and I want to look at wherever the department is. That's column C. So select case, looking at column C of my worksheet. Depending on what that value is, I'm going to do something different. So one case, and I'm going to put these 2 statements on one line. The way you say I've got 2 statements on one line in VBA is put a colon between them. In some statements, you've got to put like a terminator at the end of the line to say, I'm done with this statement. VBA says, no, just we'll assume you're done with the statement at the end of the line. So if you want to put 2 on one line, you've got to explicitly say 2, and the colon lets you do that. And it'll just make this code a little bit more easily read. In this case, I'm going to say OPT general dot value equals true. The way you set an option button is by setting its value to either true or false. And that's how you read it. If it's selected, just read the value. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that down. Actually, and then I'll just kind of look at those 4 values, look for the value that I'm looking for, and select the right one. So I'll put an else in there. If it's not one of the other 3, we're going to set it to general. Out. So what do we have? Outdoor, we have apparel. And we have hunting. And those are the names also of my objects. So now it should activate the right option button depending on which one we have selected. And we are out of time to actually write this out, but let's see if it actually works to read the data in. That says hunting. Let me go somewhere that's not hunting and see if it chooses something else. That says outdoor. We'll run it. Whoops. And it chose outdoor, so that looks good. Of course, writing this out will just be the opposite, right? Look to see which one is selected, and then write out the one write out the right value based on which one is selected. And we'll pick up there when we get together next Monday. Thanks for coming. Class dismissed. Remember, I'll see you tomorrow at 11 if you want help or review on anything, but specifically if you want help for the project, which I've pushed back by 24 hours. Did you hear back from the TA? All right. Excellent. All right. Class dismissed.